Williams sipped his Madeira. One of those ladies died just a few months ago. Old Mrs. Morton. She was a marvel. Did exactly as she pleased all her life, God bless her. Her son came home from Christmas vacation one year and brought his college roommate with him. Mama and the college roommate fell in love, and he moved into the master bedroom with her. Danny moved into the guest bedroom, and the son went back to college and never came home again. From then on, Mr. and Mrs. Morton and the roommate lived in that house under those circumstances until the old man died. They kept up appearances and pretended nothing at all outrageous had happened. Mama's young lover served as her chauffeur. Wherever he dropped her off and picked her up at the bridge parties, the old ladies would peer out them Venetian blinds. But they would never let on that they were interested, because nobody ever mentioned his name in her presence. Williams fell silent for a moment, no doubt reflecting on the recently departed Mrs. Morton. Through the open window, Monterey Square was quiet except for the rasp of a cricket and the passing now and then of a car unhurriedly negotiating the turns around the square. What do you suppose would happen, I asked, if the tour guides were told that story to the busloads of tourists? Not possible, said Williams. They keep it very prim and proper. I told Williams that as I was coming up the walk earlier, I had heard the guide on one of the tour buses talking about this house. Bless their boring little hearts, said Williams. What did the guide say? She said that the house was the birthplace of the famous songwriter Johnny Mercer, the man who wrote Moon River. Wrong, but not completely off base, said Williams. What else? That last year, Jacqueline Onassis offered to buy the house and everything in it for $2 million. The guide gets a C- for accuracy, said Williams. Now I'll tell you what really happened. Construction of the house was begun in 1860 by the Confederate General Hugh Mercer, Johnny Mercer's great-grandfather. It was unfinished when the Civil War broke out, and after the war, General Mercer was imprisoned and tried for the murder of 2 army deserters. He was eventually acquitted, largely on the testimony of his son, and released from jail a broken and very angry man. He sold the house and the new owners completed it, so none of the Mercers ever lived here, including Johnny. Later in his life, Johnny used to drop in when he was in town. In fact, he taped a Mike Douglas show in the front yard. He once offered to buy the house, but I told him, Johnny, you don't need it. You'd end up playing houseboy to it just as I have. That's as close as he ever came to living here. Williams leaned back and sent a stream of cigar smoke ceilingward. I'll come to Jacqueline Onassis in a moment, he said. But first I want to let you in on another piece of history that the tour guides never mention. It's an instant knock-off Flag Day. Happened a couple of years ago. He stood up and went over to the window. Monterey Square is lovely, he said. In my opinion, it's the most beautiful of all the squares in Savannah. The architecture, the trees, the monument, the way it all fits together. Movie makers love it. Something like 20 feature films have been shot in Savannah in the last 6 years or so, and Monterey Square is one of their favorite shooting locations. Every time filming begins, the town goes wild. Everybody wants to be an extra, meet the stars, and watch from the sidelines. The mayor and the city councilman think it's wonderful because the film companies will spend money here and Savannah will become famous and that will help tourism. But really, it isn't so wonderful at all. The movie makers pay local extras the minimum wage. Savannah doesn't get publicity after all because the audiences usually haven't the vaguest idea where the movie's been shot. In fact, the cost to Savannah turned out to be greater than the return, if you add up the overtime pay for sanitation men and police and the disruption of traffic. The film crews are also invariably rude. They leave piles of litter, destroy shrubbery, trample the grass. One crew even cut down a palm tree across the square because it didn't suit them. Well, the rudest bunch came to town a few years ago to film a CBS made-for-TV movie about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. They selected Monterey Square for an important outdoor scene, but naturally we were not consulted. The night before the filming was to begin, the police went around and abruptly ordered all of us to move our cars out of the square and not to enter or exit our houses between 10 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. The film crew then dumped 8 truckloads of dirt on the street and spread it around to make it look like the unpaved streets of 1865. The next morning we awoke to find the square full of horses and wagons and ladies in hoop skirts and a thick coating of dust everywhere. It was intolerable. The cameras were in the middle of the square, aimed directly at this house. Several of my neighbors asked me, as a founder and past president of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, to do something about it. So I went down and I asked the producer to make $1,000 contribution to the Humane Society to show his good intentions. He said he would think over it and get back to me by noon. Well, noon came and went. The producer never responded. Instead, the cameras began to roll. I decided to ruin his shot, and this is how I did it. Williams opened a cabinet to the left of the window and took out a bolt of red cloth. He held it up over his head and unfurled it with a snap of his wrist. It was an 8-foot Nazi banner. I draped this over the balcony outside the window, he said. He held the banner up so I could get a good look at the big black swastika against a white circle on a field of bright red. I bet that stopped the shooting, I said. Yes, but only temporarily, he said. The cameraman switched to the other side of the house, so I moved the flag to the window in the study. They eventually got the shot they wanted, but at least I made my point. Williams rolled up the banner and put it back in the cabinet. The furor that it caused was something I hadn't expected. The Savannah Morning News splashed the story across its front page, complete with photographs. They wrote horrible editorials and published angry letters. The wire services picked it up too, and so did the television network Evening News. I found myself having to explain that no, I was not a Nazi, and that I had used the flag to create a time warp in order to stop some very inconsiderate filmmakers, who were not Jewish as far as I knew. But I did make one terrible oversight. I had forgotten that the Temple Mikveh, Israel synagogue, is located directly across the square. The rabbi wrote me a letter asking me how I happened to have a Nazi flag handy. I wrote back saying my Uncle Jesse had brought it back as a trophy from the Second World War. I also told him I collect relics of all sorts of fallen empires, and the flag and a few other World War II items were simply part of that group. I wasn't mistaken then, I said. That was a Nazi dagger I saw on the table in the rear parlor. Oh, I have several, said Williams, plus a few sidearms and a hood ornament from a Nazi staff car. That's about the extent of it. Artifacts of Hitler's regime are not popular, but they do have historic value. Most people understand that point and know that there was nothing political about my protest. The firestorm abated after a couple of weeks, but every so often I do encounter a smouldering ember in the forms of glaring eyes or people crossing the street to avoid me. But I gather you haven't been ostracized. Oh, not at all. 6 months after Flag Day, Jacqueline Williams Dick. 6 months after Flag Day, Jacqueline Onassis came to call. Williams crossed the room and lifted the lid off a slant-top desk. Twice a year, he said, Christie's auction house has a Fabergé sale in Geneva. Last year, the star item was the sale of an exquisite jade box. It had been widely advertised, and there was lots of excitement about it. The man in charge of those sales was Giza von Habsburg. He'd be Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire today, if it still existed. Giza's a friend of mine. I've attended those sales for years. Naturally, I flew over for this one, and I said, Giza, I'm here to buy that little box. Well, Giza laughed, and he said, Jim, I have quite a number of people here to buy that little box. I had visions of having to bid against Malcolm Forbes and his ilk. But I thought at least I'd have my fun driving up the price. So I says, well, Giza, we gonna put it this way. If somebody outbids me and buys that box, they're going to, by hell or high water, know that they bought a box. The bidding started at the highest estimate. I finally bought the box for $70,000. The bidding began at the highest estimate. I finally bought the box for $70,000. Then I flew back over the Atlantic on the Concorde, and I had a champagne cocktail with the little box sitting on my linen-covered tray. The very next morning, I was down in my basement working on restoring furniture. I was jet-lagged and I was unshaven when the doorbell rang. I sent one of my associates, Barry Thomas, up to answer it. He came back downstairs all out of breath and said a tour guide was at the door and asked if I wanted to show Jacqueline Onassis through the house. I thought, this is a bunch of bull, but I came up anyway, and there was the tour guide, and indeed she had Mrs. Onassis waiting in the car. I asked her to drive around the block a few times and give me the chance to shave and get the house pulled together. While she did that, I got myself ready and told the boys to do what we call a tour of homes Latin. It's a set routine that takes a full 10 minutes of turning on lamps, opening shutters, emptying ashtrays, and clearing away newspapers. Just as we were finishing, the doorbell rang again, and there was Mrs. Onassis and her friend, Morris Templesman. I'm awfully sorry I sent you away before, I said, but we just got back last night from the Fabergé sale in Geneva. With that, Mr. Templesman said, who bought the box? Well, I said, won't you come in and see? Without another word, he took Mrs. Onassis by the arm, and he said, there it is. I told you we should have bought it. Williams handed me the box. It was a rich, deep green, about 4 inches square. The top was covered in a brilliant latticework of diamonds, punctuated with cacabon rubies. In the centre, a white oval enamelled medallion bore the cipher of Nicholas II in diamonds and gold. They were in the house about an hour or so, said Williams. They looked at everything. We went upstairs. I played the pipe organ, and then we all played roulette. Those were completely charming people. Templesman had what I would call a topside dye job. You take a man and you dip him bottom side up in hair dye, and you stop right at the ears. He was an interesting man, very knowledgeable about antiques. In fact, they both were. They'd been travelling down to the coast on his yacht, but Mrs. Onassis was very down to earth. She was wearing a white linen suit and didn't even bother brushing the dust off her chair when we sat down in the garden. She invited me to come visit her in her hovel the next time I was in New York. When they left, she asked how to get to the nearest Burger King. What about offering to buy the house for $2 million? I said. She did nothing as crass as that. But apparently she told Templesman, in front of our tour guide, who reported it to the newspapers, of course, that she wished she had owned the house and everything in it. But not Jim Williams, she said. I couldn't afford him. I ran my hands over the Fabergé box. The lid swung smoothly on its hinges. The gold clasp fastened with a muted click. As I gazed at this dazzling object, I was only half aware of a key turning in the front door of Mercer House, and of footsteps approaching in the entrance hall. Suddenly a sharp voice cut the air. God damn it, god damn bitch! A blond boy stood in the doorway. He appeared to be about 19 or 20. He was wearing blue jeans and a sleeveless black t-shirt with the words "fuck you" printed in white across the front. He was blazing with He was trembling with barely controlled fury. His sapphire eyes were blazing. What seems to be the problem, Danny? Williams asked calmly without rising from his chair. Barney, goddamn bitch. She stood me up. She's running around all the side bars. God damn it. I ain't taking her shit no more. The boy grabbed a vodka bottle from the table and filled a crystal glass to the brim. He gulped it down. His arms were tattooed, a Confederate flag on one arm, a marijuana plant on the other. Get a hold of yourself, Danny, Williams said, speaking deliberately. Just tell me what happened. Maybe I was a few minutes late. I got throwed off in my time, and so what? Shit! Her girlfriend said she left because I wasn't there when I said I'd be. He glared at Williams. Give me $20. I need the money. I'm pissed off. What do you need it for? None of your goddamn business. I need you to get fucked up tonight if that's what you really want to know. That's what. I think you've accomplished that already, sport. I ain't anywhere near fucked up enough yet. Now, Danny, don't you go doing that and driving your car. You'll be arrested for sure. You already got charges against you from the last time you got, quote, fucked up. They're really gonna nail you this time. I don't give a damn about you or Bonnie or the goddamn police. With that, the boy turned and abruptly left the room. The front door slammed. Outside, a car door opened and closed. A sharp, prolonged squeal of tires pierced the evening stillness. There was another squeal as the tire rounded the corner of Monterey Square. Then another as it turned again and sped down Bull Street. Then all was quiet. I'm sorry, said Williams. He got up and poured himself a drink. Not Madeira this time, but straight vodka. Then, silently, almost imperceptibly, he released a sigh and allowed his shoulders to relax. I looked down and saw that I was still holding the Fabergé egg. Fabergé box, dickhead. I looked down and saw that I was still holding the Fabergé box. I was clutching it so tightly I was afraid for a moment I might have dislodged a jewel or two from the top. It seemed intact. I handed it back to Williams. That was Danny Hainsford, he said. He works for me part-time renovating furniture in my workshop. Williams studied the end of his cigar. He was calm, controlled. This is not the first time something like this has happened, he said. I have an idea of how it will end up. Later tonight, about 3:30, the telephone will ring. It'll be Danny, and he'll be sweet and charming. And he'll say, Hey, Jim, this is Danny. I'm real sorry to wake you up. Boy, did I fuck up again tonight. Man, I'm about to make you some big mistakes. And I'll say, well, Danny, what happened this time? And he'll say, oh, I'm calling from the jailhouse. They put me in here again, but I ain't done nothing wrong. I was going down Abercorn Street to see if I could find Bonnie, and I burned a little rubber and turned left real quick, and there was this goddamn police car, blue lights, sirens. Man, am I in trouble? Hey, Jim, you think you can come down and get me out? And I'll say, Danny, it's late. I'm tired of this. Why don't you just cool down and relax in the jail tonight? Now, Danny won't like this one bit, but he won't lose his cool. Not now. He'll keep it calm. He'll say, I know what you mean, and you're right. I ought to stay in here the rest of my goddamn life. It's been a messed up life anyhow. He'll be working on my sympathy now. It's okay, Jim, he'll say. Just leave me here. Don't even worry about it. Hell, I don't even care. I hope I didn't get you upset. Hope you can get back to sleep again, all right. See you later. Inside, Danny will be seething because I won't come right down there. He won't show it, though, because he knows that I'm the only one who will help him. He knows I'll call the bondsman in the morning and tell him get him out, but I won't do it until the morning, after the drugs worn off. Williams gave no outward sign that he was at all embarrassed by the human tornado that had just passed through his house. Danny has two distinct personalities, he said. Williams gave no outward sign that he was at all embarrassed by the human tornado that had just passed through his house. Danny has two distinct personalities, he said. He can switch from one to the other like the pages of a book turning. Williams was speaking about Danny with calm detachment, just as he had spoken earlier about the Wadford crystal chandelier in the dining room, the portrait by Jeremiah Theus in the parlour, and the judge's son in Gangster's Maw. But he did not address the most curious question of all, Danny's presence in Mercer House, and the fact that he had already apparently had the run of it. The incongruity was startling, Perhaps it registered on my face, because Williams offered something of an explanation. "I have hypoglycemia," he said, "and lately I've been blacking out. Danny stays here sometimes to babysit me when I'm not feeling well." May have been the Madeira or the atmosphere of frankness that Williams had inspired with his stories. At any rate, I felt free to observe that blacking out alone may be preferable to having this person actually run loose in the house. Williams laughed. "Actually, I think Danny may be improving a little." "Improving? Over what?" "2 weeks ago we had a similar scene, but it ended a bit more dramatically. Danny was agitated about the time because his best friend had made a disparaging remark about his car, and his girlfriend had refused to marry him. Danny came back to the house and carried on about it, and before I knew what was happening, he had stomped a small table, thrown a bronze lamp against the wall, and slapped a cut glass water pitcher onto the floor with so much force it made a permanent imprint on the hard pine floorboards. But he wasn't done yet. He took one of my German Lugers and fired a bullet into the floor upstairs. Then he ran out the front door and fired straight another shot right into Monterey Square, trying to knock out a streetlight. Naturally, I called the police. But when Danny heard the sirens, he tossed the gun into the bushes, ran indoors, flew up the stairs, and climbed into bed with all of his clothes on. The cops were no more than a minute behind him, but by the time they had gotten upstairs, Danny was pretending to be fast asleep. When they woke him, he put a guest on there. When the cops woke him, he put on an act of confusion and denied he'd broken anything or shot any guns. But the police noticed tiny drops of blood on his arm and the little splinters of glass that had shot up when he had smashed the pitcher on the floor. So they took him to jail. I figured the longer I left him in here, the madder he'd get, so next morning I dropped the charges and got him out. I did not ask the obvious question, why do you have anything to do with him? Instead, I asked a question of more immediate concern. You said Danny had fired one of your German Lugers. How many do you have? Several, said Williams. I need them for security. I'm here by myself a lot, and I've had a couple of robberies. The second was pulled off by a man who was armed with a submachine gun, and I was asleep upstairs at the time. That's when I installed our alarm system. Works just fine when I'm out of the house or upstairs, but I can't throw the switch when I'm walking around here on the main floor because it'll summon the police. So I keep pistols in strategic places. There's a Luger in the rear library, another in the desk drawer in my office, a third in the Irish linen press in the hall, and a Smith & Wesson up in the living room. I've also got a shotgun loaded and 3 or 4 rifles upstairs. The pistols are already loaded too. That's 4 loaded pistols, I said.